A very good morning, evening, afternoon, depending on where you're watching from. This is the Three Quarters Podcast. My name is Ngash. It's been a year since we recorded. Withdrawal symptoms are real. Maybe better English, I don't know, but we'll see as the show goes on. My guests today are some young thugs, young bloods, young cats. Kiarie and Ndegz form part of Box Regista, your girl's favorite football podcast, right?
Yeah. Hey, you got it right. One take.
So I'll welcome you to Africa's premier sports video podcast, the Three Quarters Podcast. And to jump straight into it, our discussion today is at the fact that we have seen in the last 2 weeks, sports has been shut down in Kenya. The government issued a directive cancelling all sporting activities in the country. So now, the catch-22 is this. You have the Olympics happening later on in the year. You have multiple tournaments happening in various disciplines. You have football matches that are supposed to be played. You have the HSB 7 circuit. You have Bathurst Cup, actually the under-20 Africa rugby tournament that's supposed to be hosted in Nairobi. You have the World Rally Championship sometime later on in the year. And the question then I ask, and I think Ndegz, you'll go first, is where does that leave us, or where does that leave the athletes in Kenya right now?
First of all, thanks for having us on behalf of Box to Box. I think for us, if you look at most countries, especially New Zealand, Australia, Germany, they've set the way to go, especially during COVID. And what we've seen is that the moment there's a directive from the government where it's like quarantine 14 days, and as long as those things are set and in place, there's no going around. There's no going around. Yeah, there's no circumventing those rules. Those rules, I feel like once those rules are in place and we actually adhere to them, then now all these organizations can actually now find ways to if we know we're traveling to Kenya, let's say Safari Rally, yeah, we're traveling to Kenya. There's a mandatory quarantine period of 14 days. There's no circumventing that. They know when they come here, it's 14 days. Or alternative is we're doing tests, and so the thing is the organization, because the organization, it has to come from the government. You see, then that's the thing. If these organizations went and did things on their own, of course, and then there's an outbreak, and then we end up now bringing up athletes come, and Kenya will be held responsible for all these things, So I feel like the directives have to come from the government, and then from there now we see how these organizations can actually work around these rules that have been set. Because for now, I think the athletes are really suffering. Yeah, they're really, really suffering, and for a fact, there's countries that have shown us that it's possible. It's possible to work around this COVID and the regulations, and there's a way players can actually get back on the field, on the court and whatever, and actually do their thing.
Yeah, and I mean, Kiarie, something that you've mentioned that has actually triggered my thought in this, in whatever we're discussing about, is very many guys don't know actually the Magical Kenya Open happened, right? Yes. It did happen in Kenya, and it was hosted in Kenya. Now, which always brings me to the point, and I want you to take the discussion this side, is when you have your money, then government is always willing to make sure that things work out for you. And in the last few years, golf has had a ridiculous amount of money. So do you think that then we need to fix, and we'll discuss heavily about where it ties in with regard to the business of sport, but do you think we then need to fix our issues money-wise so that government can start taking us serious? I mean, what do you think? And piggybacking off what Ndegz said.
Generally, not just fixing the money issue like that. I'll think some sports require government assistance, and particularly when you're talking like the Olympics, the national teams in particular, those require government assistance. So golf in itself has professionals running it, and they have investment from other places, not necessarily the government. But if you require the national team to train for the Olympics, you need to provide the testing facilities. You need to provide the safe facilities. So sorting out the money issue in general when it comes to the national teams, not necessarily. That requires more of the government effort in that, because I don't really see how athletics, if it's not for the government, where else will they get the money from? Individuals are not pumping in the money into that.
And with athletics, it's as an athlete, you can't do anything without the permission of your federation. So if you're a weightlifter, you need permission from them, right? If they say no, it's no. You cannot compete in any event. You see, a footballer, if he gets a tryout in Belgium right now and he goes to Belgium and plays there, if he never represents his national team, he's still doing what he loves, right? Still playing in Belgium, he's making his money. An athlete cannot do that. I can't just go and be like, okay, let me go lift somewhere else, and there's no competitions going on. So until you get that permission from your federation, which is government still, I mean, there's nothing they can do.
Actually, let me tell you, the funny thing, federations are not really government. Federations are more of, you're mandated to run whatever sport it is in that country. You're an affiliate of the world body. You're just tasked by the world body to run the organization. So, and that's why, maybe it's a discussion we'll have in another episode. And that's why, personally, for me, I'm not a big fan of government funding federations. I'm a big fan of government funding things like Commonwealth, Olympics. Yes, fund those particular ones. But you don't have, the FA is not funded by the British government.
That's true. But what about our federations?
And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So we are handcuffed at this moment.
We are handcuffed because, in my opinion, because the people who lead our federations are not, they're politicians. They're not really businessmen, for lack of a better word. So they don't generate their own income. And that's why, even if it comes to testing, Gava is the one who's funding the testing as opposed to the federation. But anyway, we'll discuss that. We move on to what's been happening in the West. And this is particularly, we were talking off air, in Germany, Bundesliga came back first. We saw the amount of work that the Premier League did to come back and finish the season. NBA, we saw the amount of work that even the NFL did. For me, the guys who nailed it, I know they were a small country, but the guys who've nailed it is New Zealand with rugby at Aotearoa. They actually have fans in the stadium, and unlike all the other sports. And Australia is catching up. So what do you think, and Kiarie will go first, what do you think they have done right? Or what do you think is working for them? And then I'll have Ndegz comment on that, and then we'll finish up with how do we move it here? How do we bring it back home? What do you think all these countries are doing right in terms of that?
All these countries have actually been able to single out the athletes, put them aside. Like, if you're doing this, if you're playing a certain sport, if you're playing in the EPL, they have certain protocols that need to be followed. So as much as the virus is affecting people around, they're able to control it in that environment of their players. So if you're not able to do this around London, you're not really able to do this around London. So stay there. And it's fine. It has a lot to do with facilities also. So I guess most of that has to be, if we're trying to bring some of that stuff to Kenya, we have to improve our facilities. But that might be the first. That might be the first step you require if you want to copy what those guys are doing. Because in order to bring back sports, you need regular, weekly, maybe 3 times. You're tested 3 times a week, maybe. You require that first of all, and then you require that sort of bubble for the players themselves. We don't have the resources to do that, and the players themselves aren't remunerated well enough to be able to stay in a bubble without going to their daily grinds, without going to the usual stuff. So I don't really these guys have succeeded in, they had the resources first of all, so it was pretty simple to lay the framework for this. We'll set it out this way. Kenya, we're really a long way off because it's I'd want to say we can measure that here, but we don't really. Normal citizens aren't getting tested, so I don't really understand how we're going to be able to put that into sports generally.
And Ndegz?
I think that moment of having a bubble, I mean, a bubble will still be necessary, but at this moment, it's cheaper to vaccinate all the athletes. First of all, just as a ground level, you have to be vaccinated. For us, I think that has to be a requirement. If you're going to play KPL, whatever, you have to be vaccinated. That should just be the foundation, be vaccinated. So what, like, back to your point about the NBA, how the NBA had a bubble, yeah. So they went to Disney World, had everyone there staying there, caterers coming in, blah blah blah. Then you go and play in designated whatever courts, right? NFL kind of tried to do the same thing, but NFL is a different sport because in one game you have 53 players, you have 32 teams. That's a different animal altogether. But locally, like, I think the teams based in Nairobi, for example, there's a way you can always arrange those fixtures, yeah, such that you're playing within the same area for, let's say, 2-3 weeks, yeah. So let's say you're playing. There's no point in you going to Naivasha, then coming back to Nairobi, then going to Machakos. I mean, that's if the season was regular. But if people were able to just have those fixtures, if you have people within a certain area play within the same like the same time frame, if they have to take like a week off after that, you test them and see who's negative, who's positive, because it's impossible. It's actually impossible to have a bubble, as you said, resources, right? But the one thing we have to our advantage is that these guys right now, we've got to a point where we have a vaccine. You could still vaccinate all these players. You could still have them. You could schedule the fixtures in a way people are playing in the same area at least for a period of like 3-4 weeks. If it's a team from Kisumu, they know they'll be here for. That's difficult, I get. But I feel like there's ways around it that you can at least have these guys participating in, like actually playing and because I think it's difficult. But for an athlete cannot just stay at home, They're still grinding. They still have to stay fit. You're asking them not to play for 6 weeks. Then they come back, you expect them to perform at the same level they
Gyms
left.
have been closed, so they can't even keep up with their fitness regimes.
Again, like you said, in most of these countries, football has contributed to the economy in very different ways. So investors themselves, the restaurants, the shops, those guys are pushing for football to come back, and they're willing to make it a conducive environment for football to come back.
I believe the main reason is because sports is not a contributor to the economy in Kenya, and that's why it's been given a back burner seat. I think it's because if you look at the billions of dollars in contracts, the NBA contracts or the NFL contracts, the TV contracts, or the EPL contracts, the billions of pounds that are going into production and just televising these games, those countries cannot afford to keep sports locked down because they're thinking about the amount of money that's being raised off those sports. You think about if you look in Kenya, even just that we're talking about Magical Kenya, it's the amount of money they're bringing in. I remember at the first lockdown last year when COVID came to Kenya, within 3 weeks, golf was already back. They had come up with protocols for golf, so you can only play a 2-ball. Maximum is a 2-ball. You don't have caddies and all that. Now let me tell you something, guys. The smallest golf course in this country employs 87 people. 87 caddies. Throw in another maybe 20 guys in terms of admin. That's the smallest golf club. So you're directly losing off. That's one. Now talk about Karen, Bodaiga, all those guys. So I think, and maybe you guys can have some comments before we wrap up. I think the reason why sports gets a back burner in this country is because it's not a contributor to the economy. I don't know what you guys think.
No, that's true. Like that's a very valid point. But at the same time, if the joy that sports gives to people in this country is something that we also take for granted. So like, let's just assume the Olympics happen right now, yeah? I mean, they're going to happen. But then Kenya, for some reason, pulls out. And then for 3 weeks, we have to see an Ethiopian winning 5,000 steeplechase. We have to see an Ethiopian winning 5,000
Nothing
meters,
against the Ethiopians.
meters. Nothing against them.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the track, they are our rivals.
Yes,
That's a derby day, right?
True.
Those are our rivals. Do you think we're going to stay with that like in our souls for the next 4 years?
No.
Be painful, hella painful.
Be very painful.
Yeah.
And those are just the simple things, like just even if it's not the contribute, because it's we can't just all of a sudden make it contribute a lot to the economy, right? We have to find ways. That's a whole
That's a whole other discussion in itself.
But at the bare minimum, we cannot be losing. That's our pride. Our source and joy at the Olympics is us guys always go there and we're always like doing
like steeplechase is a given. We are winning that.
And right now we have a Kenyan who ran a 10.01 meters. Ferdinand Omanyala. And Ferdinand is he'll be the first Kenyan to be running 100 meters. Yeah. And you see, those are things that, like, that's a whole different, like, we're so used to watching Bolt there, whatever. Now imagine you're seeing Johan Blake, you see, and then you see Ferdinando Manyala just chilling there, boy from Huruma. That's a sense of joy and pride that I don't think we should be very willing. Like, we need to fight not to at least let go of that.
I agree with you. I even when sports had come back, the little I watched in terms of Kenya Cup, I had missed that feeling. So I do agree with you. Guys, parting shot with regard to sports as a business in Kenya, and I'll ask you, do you think it can happen, and how do you think it can happen? Kiarie will go first.
Sports as a business can happen, but again, that brings back the government side. The government needs to get out of that. We need to have privatization of most of these organizations, and sports teams. Investors need to actually check into those sports teams. The elite are elite in the society. They're out here building flats. They're building buildings all around, restaurants. Invest some of that money into teams. Even drug dealers do it in Colombia, man.
You're right.
The tale of the two Escobar.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, the tale of the Diego Escobar and Pablo Escobar. Yeah.
So just bring that's how we can be able to get that, because once football teams are earning money for these individuals, they'll give it back to the players. The outskirts. It's a new stadium. Hapo tu, go outside those restaurants outside Nairobi West.
Yep.
Those things will pick immediately. Sports is
Ndegz?
I totally agree with that point. But the moment these teams get money, the first person they'll be thinking of, it should not be by the way, the first person should be the players. Our club, our team, like it's nothing without the players and supporters. Yeah. If Tusker are getting paid good money, right? I don't mind playing in front of an empty stadium, because at least I know I'm going to sleep well, I'm going to feed my family, and I will come back and give joy to the people who like watching me, right? If I'm not getting paid, that's a whole, like, it's difficult. It's difficult for me to give 100%. It's difficult, so the first thing, like, what you said is very right. Like, yes, you start paying these clubs and find a way to, Gavak pulls out fast, and then you find a way to get teams this money and whatever investment. But the moment they get that investment, the players should always be the first priority. Because even on the worst days, if the players know they're getting paid, they will still give it their all.
It's Jobo.
They will give it their all. Yeah. And just that effort alone. Teams like, I'll just to Patrick shot, as a team like Burnley. Yes. Burnley are never going to win the Premier League, okay, like in the near future. Yeah. But there's something about how they play. How they play really reflects the type of people in that area. So Burnley will never be there because we play beautiful football. No, these guys give effort every single day. These guys don't give up. They're basically a mirror reflection of the people and the community. Yeah. And them giving, that's the sense of pride the people of Burnley will always have with their club, And I feel like that's something that once you pay the players, once you give them that motivation, then it's easy for them to even play for their own people.
That's right, man. Gents, thank you very much for coming to the 3 Quarters podcast. Continue doing whatever you guys are doing. I think there's need for more sports content and not trash TV, as we're seeing a lot. Yeah. There's need for more sports content. So you guys keep on doing what you're doing. And thank you very much for gracing the 3 Quarters podcast, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
And this has been hustling this podcast. This podcast has been, guys, this podcast has been through thick and thin.
Yeah, it's been 4 years, going into the 5th year. We took a break last year. So we are back, guys, now. A 3 Quarters podcast on our YouTube channel. Content becoming first and thick. So you have a good evening, depending on what time you're watching, actually. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and see you next time. Thank you, gents.
Peace.
Bless.